Beauty from ashes. Happy Mother's Day, everybody. I know that Mother's Day is can be a little mixed bag, as the girls were sharing. There's some really strong, wonderful emotions typically associated with our mothers and Mother's Day. There can also be some hardships and some sorrow and difficulty. So, but we want to do this. We want to, above all things, there's some of us, I know there's among us some that want to be mothers, haven't been able to be mothers. There's just a mixture of things, but we may not all be able to be mothers, but we all have a mother. And so we do want to celebrate them and thank God for them. Our mothers make tremendous sacrifices for us and give so much of themselves so that we can have life and be able to be here and live on this earth. So we are thankful for you and for all that you do for us. Much of what you do goes maybe it's assumed or taken for granted. But today we want to say thank you. And we're going to look at a story of beauty from ashes. It's a story of tragedy and loss, but it's a story that from that emerges beauty, great beauty and redemption. And it's something that God does, and it's something that only he can do. And I'm hopeful that no matter what your story is and what you're in the middle of and what your walk through life has included, that you will see and once again believe in the power of God to bring redemption, to bring healing, to bring life, beauty from ashes. And so today we're going to be in the scriptures looking at the book of Ruth in the Old Testament. It's right after Judges, and it actually occurs during the time of the Judges. So if you have a Bible, you want to turn there or navigate on your phone, or we've got some hosts coming down handing out Bibles. If you don't have one, raise your hand and get a Bible and find the book of Ruth. And as we're getting all that situated, I'm going to tell you a personal story. My mom grew up in a home that after age 9, Mother's Day was not a day to celebrate. And the reason for that was that her mother passed away when she was 9 years old. She grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, and my grandfather, her father, Bob, his family, the Titcomb family, had come over from England. They had converted over there to the Mormon church, and there were individuals over there recruiting people to come over to the new country, and they'd put a fund together. They would loan people money so they could make the ship voyage, and my family did that. And so the Titcomb line came across from England, from Europe, landed in the new country, made their way out to Salt Lake City and helped establish that part of the country with the Mormon church and the leadership of guys like Brigham Young and things like that. And so that was kind of their connection. Now, the great-great-grandfather, I think it was, that came over, things didn't work out perfectly for them. He came over with his wife, and they had a young girl that helped her in the home. And under the Mormon church leadership, he was encouraged to marry her as well and have a polygamous kind of family. That was being encouraged at the time. And he tried that. It didn't work out well for him. His wife didn't appreciate that. It caused problems and conflict. They separated. He ended up taking off and ended up in Montana somewhere. I don't know exactly what happened to him, but he wasn't with the family. But grandma, the mom, great-great-grandma, whatever, the mom stayed there and raised the kids. And so that led to my mother arriving there and having life. But she had 3 sisters. And like I said, her mother was ill. She had come from Chicago. She too had converted to Mormonism from Catholicism. And so here they were trying to live out their existence in Utah, and she gets sick and passes away. And my mom was pretty traumatized by that, as you can imagine, young girl and having to go to the hospital, seeing her mom sick, seeing her tubes, hooked up to her, and it's just very, very traumatic for her. And it left her with a great deal of loss and sorrow at a very young age. It's hard enough for adults to figure out those things, but as a kid, her life took a tragic turn very young, at a very young age. The story we're going to look at this morning has a character within it by the name of Naomi, who will also experience some of those same things. Now, the setting for our book, Ruth, is kind of historically where it comes is it is during the time of the Judges. Now, how we get to the time of the Judges with the nation of Israel in Scripture is we get through the book of Genesis. You know how Genesis kind of ends is the nation of Israel is in Egypt. They've gone there because of a famine, and they prosper and thrive and grow as a people, but then they are enslaved by one of the pharaohs, and so they live in under slavery as a group of people, and God raises up a leader in Moses to lead them out, and they go out of Egypt, and they're headed back to the land of Canaan, the land that God had promised to Abram and to his descendants. And so they're headed back there, and Moses leads them right up to the entrance of the land of Canaan. They fail to trust God that he will take them in and help them defeat the giants that are in the land and the opposing people that live there. And so they run away. They spend 40 years in the wilderness until another generation is raised up, and then they go back for a second try. And Moses leads them up, but because of his issues in leadership, his anger issues and other problems, God says, you're not going to lead them into the land of Canaan. So he appoints a guy by the name of Joshua. And Joshua leads the people into the land of Canaan. They begin to do battle with the people that live there, and God gives them victory. And for the most part, they take the land of Canaan. Now, they're supposed to completely move the people that were the inhabitants of the land out, and God had given them parameters of the land that he was going to give them. But as Joshua grows old and comes to the end of his life, they make a few final attempts, some of the leaders in Israel, but they do not complete the mission. And so what happens is those peoples who live there, who have other gods, they worship other gods, not the God of the Bible. And so the people of Israel begin influenced by them, and they begin to worship them at times and follow them. And God says, you're prostituting yourselves to other gods. You're supposed to be following me. And of course, their worship of other gods leads to horrific things that they practice as a people, destructive, damaging things to themselves, to their children, to their families. And so God, during this season, would allow those peoples surrounding them to oppress them at times. And then they would eventually cry out for help, and God would raise up what are called judges. These are leaders in no king and no real prophet over Israel, but God would anoint a judge by the power of his spirit to help get them out from underneath the oppression of these peoples that lived around them. And so that's kind of the setting we're in as we get to the book of Ruth. Ruth is written during the time of the judges. We don't know exactly what judge in what era, but because of some of the countries involved, we can figure that maybe it was a little bit further down the line as far as the timeline of when they were in this period. But as they are in the time of the judges and the book of Ruth opens, we find that there is a famine in the land of Israel. And this family that we're going to follow lives in Bethlehem, in Judah. They were of the tribe of Judah. And so they find themselves in dire straits. The husband is not able to provide for his family, and so he leaves, might have sold his parcel of land that he had inherited, that God had been appointed to his family. Might have done that. He might have just left it to be farmed by somebody else, but it wasn't producing anything. So they went down to Moab. Moab was one of those countries that had oppressed them at times. And the second judge that is risen up by God actually frees them from the oppression of one of the Moab kings. And you can read about that in the first part of Judges. But anyway, at this time, it's obviously a peaceful relationship. And so they make their way down to Moab. It's to the southeast of Israel. It's a bit of a journey, but they make their way down there, and they're looking for a way to provide for their family. And while they're there in Moab, Naomi, who is one of the main characters in the story, begins to experience very painful loss. And so the first thing we see as we look at the book of Ruth is that far from home, Naomi endures devastating loss. Let's read the first couple of verses of the book of Ruth. If you're following along in your Bible, chapter 1, starting in verse 1, it says, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn." It just means to travel and try to find a place to live away from his home. Went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. The name of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, and they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem. Ephrathites, it's another name for Bethlehem. And so that was in Judah, of the tribe of Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. these took Moabite wives, and the name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. And they lived there about 10 years. And both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Now, Del Tackett has said, he kind of has a statement, the Bible is just a master of the understatement. And it kind of feels that way as we start this story. It's like in a paragraph. What we get is unthinkable tragedy that occurs in the life of this woman, Naomi. She's a mother. She's a husband, or a wife first, and then a mother. A woman in a house full of men. I just kind of imagine, I've seen women like that. That's the environment they're in. They've got a bunch of boys and then an extra boy that's a little bit older who's called the husband, and they got to take care of him, right? And I've seen women just love it. That is their sweet spot. They're full of life. They know they're needed. They kind of like being in that environment with a bunch of guys, and they it's just heaven for them. And I kind of envision Naomi like that, just loving life. She's needed. She knows her place. She knows what she's supposed to do, and she's flourishing and thriving and loving it. And then the unthinkable happens. First, her husband, far too young, something happens. We're not given the details. Does he get sick? Does he have an accident? We don't know. But his life is taken far too soon. And it would seem, perhaps before she has raised these 2 boys, it would seem like they're still in the home, children at some level. We don't know how old. But she somehow, in a world where women didn't have a lot of rights, they didn't have a lot of marketable skills, she somehow finds a way to provide for them, I'm thinking, raise them the remainder of their years to the point that they can get married. And then she helps them find wives. She's making the best of it. She's lost her husband, but she's not going to quit. She's not going to give up. She continues to fight fiercely, move forward. She's got these boys to raise. She's got a job to do. And after they get married, and they're off living life, and then tragedy strikes again. And I can't imagine what she must have felt, how devastating it must have been for her to go through this loss after loss after loss. I know people who've gone through great tragedy. My wife and I have been through tragedy. Just this last year, we lost her mother. So this is her first Mother's Day without her mother. This Mother's Day has mixed emotions. We have our daughters and daughter-in-law who have children, and we've got grandbabies, and that's to be celebrated and excited. We also have lost, right? And so it's like you just have these mixture of feelings and emotions that are real as you go through life, and that's kind of where we're at. And I can only imagine where Naomi was at, in a foreign land, away from any support system, away from her family of origin, and losing everything. I know mothers, no matter who they are, no matter how old, how young, what they've been through, there's a great deal of risk that they take upon themselves to go through the process of allowing a child to grow within them. There's a great deal of risk. There's got to be apprehension and fear involved because we live in a world that's not perfect. And all women have heard of women who experience loss in that process, go through tragedy. It's part of the story of the human race. And so maybe we don't think about it, but when moms do, the risk involved. And it takes a courageous woman to step into that risk and to take that risk and allow the attempt. And as beautiful as it is, because I can't imagine, it's one thing, I'm not being weird here, but having a human being grow inside of you has got to be something that's just, I don't know, beyond explanation. I don't want to experience, but man, it's incredible. How does that work? What is that like? I mean, the bond that you're going to get with that human. And you know, when they're born, I mean, they're beautiful and they're naughty and they're strong-willed and they're kind and they're cute and they're evil. It takes a strong heart. I can't, dads, like, yeah, we got it, but it takes a strong heart to have that bond and that connection with a human being and risk what could happen and does happen. And so there's something to be said for Naomi and the power of her existence, the character, the kind of person that she was. But as full as her life was, when everything was right and her family was together, it was equally empty and broken when she lost not one, not two, but all of them. And we've learned as we go through life and we study the human race, we study our psyches, we study what we go through, we find that there's stages to grieving. At least it's been suggested, and it would seem that we can see some of this maybe in Naomi's life. The stages of grieving that we have kind of out there that we use are, step one is denial, right? It's kind of a difficulty at even accepting it. Oftentimes when I meet with a family that's experienced sudden, unexpected loss and they're trying to put a service together, sometimes there's not even a lot of emotion. It's just kind of numb, right? Can't even believe that. I haven't really even accepted yet that it's occurred. And then what typically comes next is anger. And everybody's uncomfortable with that, especially at church. You can't be angry. Don't be angry. Just, it's okay. It's going to be all right. We want to do those things, but anger is a part of grief. Naomi's angry. We're going to see that in her responses. Then there's bargaining. Sometimes, typically that's the next step of trying to just recover this. And could it be different? And is there a way to change it? Maybe begging God to do the unthinkable. And then depression typically follows, which is a dark place to be without a lot of hope. And where the girls said we want to isolate. And then hopefully if we move through this grief process, and especially, and I really think only if we allow God into it, we can arrive at acceptance where there can be some healing that God can bring into our lives. But loss is really not something that we ever recover from. There's no replacement for the people that we lose, and it's something we carry with us. And so we see Naomi walk through this kind of experience. It's devastating, complete in its nature. Everything that she has is gone. My mom's family went through a season like that too. When her mom died, there were some of my grandpa's brothers passed away. There were accidents, there was addictions, there was illness. It just seemed like there was a curse on that family. And though I wasn't alive, I've heard about it plenty of times. And there was a lot of funerals, and there was a lot of grieving, and there was a lot of loss, and there was a lot of use of medication, if you will, to numb the pain. Because Grandpa Joe, who had all these boys in this huge family, he introduced alcohol to them, was quite a drinker and a partier. And as they went into this season of devastation and loss, especially the boys turned to that in a heavy way. And so my grandpa, my mom's dad, turned to alcohol to ease his sorrows. He went into himself. He kind of left them, my mom and her two younger sisters, to fend for themselves. He didn't care much about what they did. He didn't interact much. He was trying to figure out his own life and his own loss. He moved them back to his parents' home, to grandma's home, where there were other stragglers, cousins, people that had lost their parents too. And it was kind of a big dysfunctional mess. And my mom was in the middle of that, made to feel like she was imposing and very poor, barely enough to provide for everyone, which causes more stress and difficulty. As our story continues in Ruth, Naomi hears some news, caught in the middle of her grief, struggling to get up each day probably and move forward and just function. She hears news that things have changed back at home, back in Bethlehem, back in Israel. And the word in the fields in Moab was that God had once returned to Israel and he was providing food for his people once again. And so there were rains that had returned and the ground was producing. And so though she is consumed with grief, Naomi returns to Israel is what we see next. And so let's continue reading in verse 6 of chapter 1 as we go through the story. It says, then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her two daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." And they lifted up their voices and wept, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me and more, also, if anything but death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. Naomi, consumed with grief, makes plans to return. It's kind of an interesting dialogue here, or the way in which the story unfolds. She seems to get up one day and say, "I'm headed back." And these girls, which isn't exactly the norm, not all mothers get along with their daughters-in-law. I don't know. Finding someone good enough for their sons doesn't always happen. So that can be a strained relationship. But anyway, Naomi seems to have worked things out with them perfectly. She's brought them into her family. Remember, to become a wife of one of these boys meant to change your religious beliefs, right? To agree to live according to the family traditions of this Jewish family. There was a lot involved in that, living in a foreign country in a pagan land with different gods. And so these girls had accepted that as part of marrying these boys. And so Naomi had brought them in and had embraced them. And they were so much so that they were her daughters. And so I think it seems like when she first gets up to go back, it's like, of course we go together, we're family, which is incredible. Sometimes loss and tragedy divides people. Happens all the time, but not here. And I think that speaks a bit to Naomi and her character, but also, as we're going to see, to these women. But Naomi seems to have an epiphany, a realization. Why are you girls coming back with me? This isn't the right decision for you. There's no future for you in Israel. Am I going to be able to find a husband for you among a bunch of Jewish men? Your foreign Moabite women, they're not going to want to marry you. That's frowned upon. I can't have children, right, to provide husbands for you. That's ridiculous. And so she tries to talk them into going back. Go back to your homeland. Seems as though she's thinking about them and their future, and she's concerned with them, even though she is in the middle of her own grief. And Orpah, one of the girls, does finally agree to go back after much coercion from Naomi. She agrees to go back. But Ruth, who at this point steps to the front of the story and becomes one of the absolute prominent character, and we see why, because of her powerful response in this unbelievable moment. Because Ruth, in a world of selfish, self-centered people, she does the unthinkable. She makes her famous statement, which we probably all heard maybe many times: "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people. Your God, my God," right? I'm a Jew now. I am going to worship Yahweh like I am your daughter, and I'm not leaving. I'm going to stay with you to the end. I will travel with you. I will live with you. This is and would not have been a normal response. And so a young woman born in a foreign country to foreign gods, not worshiping the one true God, has obviously, in the 10 years of being married to a man who worships Yahweh, with a mother-in-law who worships Yahweh, has had a transformation occur in her life. And she is now connected to the one true God, and she's not going back. And so she gives up her rights, her life, the right to have what she wants, to have the life that she wants, right? To be happy, all those things we could talk about. She rejects that path in life and says, I'm going to take the life of sacrificial service to someone else. And so what we see next is Ruth's love and loyalty prevent Naomi from returning home alone. She had lost it all, but there's a glimmer of hope. And that's what we get in the story. There's an individual that has stepped to the top and is going to do something exceptional. And so we want to keep reading in verse 19 through 22. It says this, so the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? She said to them, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? So Naomi returned, Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. We talk about in our world, I've heard this said in our culture, that we become a grievance culture, and that we identify ourselves with our grievances or our pain or our loss or our suffering. We identify ourselves with our mental illness or our problems, whatever it is, that's what we identify. We use those titles to identify ourselves. And a lot of times there's talk by people that is this a generational issue? Is just this negative slide that our country is in? Is this what's causing it? You know, is it the Hallmark Channel that's causing us to get overly emotional and I don't know. Listen, here's what I can say. This story comes from thousands and thousands of years ago. And Naomi was so identified with her loss, she changed her name to reflect the loss. Because Naomi means pleasant. And she said, no, ladies, don't call me that anymore. Don't call me that anymore. Call me Mara. Bitter, where God turned the waters bitter when the nation of Israel left Egypt to punish them for their lack of faith and disobedience. And so she says, that's who I am. That's what God's done to me. He's punishing me. He's cursed me. He's brought this calamity on me. He's taken everything from me. Don't call me Naomi. That's not who I am anymore, right? That's an identity shift. That's a change of identity to identify with the suffering and loss and tragedy that she had been through. That's how she felt. I don't think it's anything new. I think it's the way we've been. It's the story of the human race because we experience suffering and loss due to the sin that we brought into the world and we continue to perpetuate, but we want to blame somebody else for it. And she does. God did this to me. It is my belief that in loss and in suffering, we all say those things. I know I have. God, why? Why am I going through this? Why are you allowing this to happen? Why are you causing it to happen? Am I just a bug that you're waiting to crush? It just seems like you're against me. If you haven't felt it, then maybe you haven't got in touch with that part of yourself. But I think most people have asked that at some point. And we have a tendency to say, well, God, you could stop it. You could have kept it from happening, so you're responsible for it. And certainly the sovereignty of God includes the fact that God is all powerful over everything. He holds the universe together. That's what we're taught in the Bible. That is part of the doctrines that we learn. It's part of the nature and character of God. But it's altogether different to say God is in complete control and that he does oversee our existence. It is a complete different leap to say that he is the source of evil, that he causes the pain and suffering in the world. Those two that is not a math equation that actually works out. God is not the source of evil. did not create evil, but he did create a world in which it could exist. And oftentimes we're looking for some place to go with our pain, and in our anger, we do blame God just like Naomi does. I think we see it. It's certainly part of the human experience, and probably none of us are exempt from it completely, but God is not absent. He doesn't take that misplaced blame and anger and aggression and hold it against us and use it against us and say, well, fine, figure it out on your own. You know, we do that sometimes. When we get blamed for things we didn't do, if somebody gets angry at us and we're trying to help them, we can lash out, we can react negatively. But God doesn't, because see, God is love. He is compassion and grace and mercy, and he is a rescuer. He is the one that brings life when there is death. And so God is at work in Naomi's story in ways that she cannot even recognize, because God has brought a woman into her life to ease her pain and suffering. A woman that has such powerful character as to be loyal in the midst of a time where she should not be. My mom, in the midst of her suffering and grief with loss in her family, somehow got connected to a missionary by the name of John Hornock, who was a World War II veteran, a survival of Pearl Harbor, had gone to Moody Bible Institute, graduated, and felt like God was calling him to go, of all places, to Utah to try to reach people for Jesus there. Unbelievable, but he found his way there, and after 10 years of working and establishing a small Bible church with a few people attending, he had not seen anyone come to Christ, come to true faith in Jesus out of Mormonism. And that was his primary aim and goal. But probably as a result of the death and loss in my mom's family, he got involved. Somebody asked him in to do a funeral or something. And all of a sudden he gets connected, and my mom ends up at his church on a Sunday, and she hears the gospel and she responds. She trusts in Jesus as a little 11-year-old girl who has lost her mom. Naomi and Ruth arrive back in Bethlehem, in Judah, and they find a place in town, it would seem. Don't know what kind of resources they have. Perhaps the sale of the land before they left. There's still some money to work with. Naomi seems to have some provision, but it's not enough. Maybe somebody loans them a place to stay. I don't know, but she sends Ruth out the next day into the barley harvest. See, they arrive back in Israel at the time of the barley harvest, right after the Pentecost festival, which we talked about a few weeks ago. The day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit came, was actually a Jewish festival, and that's when they arrive, and it's the beginning of the barley harvest. And so Ruth goes out and finds the farmers in the fields, the crews that are harvesting the grain, and she travels along behind them looking for bits of grain that they have left behind. It's called gleaning, and it happened. The poor would do this in Israel. And so she goes behind finding grain the first day and picking up stuff. And then the owner of the land, who's a wealthy businessman, an established man in Israel, arrives on the scene. His name's Boaz, and he sees this probably fairly attractive young woman out in the fields picking up grain. He asks his workers about her, finds out who she is, and then he says, hey, let her pick up grain. Don't give her a hard time. Don't harass her. Leave her alone. In fact, leave some extra on the ground for her to pick up. And so she goes home that night to Naomi with a lot of grain. Naomi says, man, what's happened? How did you fall upon such fortune? What's going on? Whose fields did you glean in? And she said, well, there's this guy named Boaz, and he was so kind to me. And of course, Naomi says, I know who that guy is. He's part of our family. He's related to Elimelech, my husband. And then she kind of reveals this plan that had been put in place from ancient times called the Levirate laws, which would protect a man's family line. Land was tied to people, to men. And in the nation of Israel, if a man were to die without an heir, Then there was a provision where one of the man's brothers was to provide his wife with an heir that would then be his child and would continue the family line, because God cared that the people of Israel had land and had the ability to provide for themselves and to take care of their families. And so they had made a law, and it's in the Mosaic law, but it really started before that. And Boaz ends up being in line to be able to provide that kind of escape or that redemption. It's called a kinsman redeemer, to redeem Naomi's line and Elimelech's line and reestablish it. And so they go through this formal process. Naomi coaches Ruth, and she goes to the threshing floor at night, and there's this whole deal. You can read about it. It's really interesting. But in the end of the day, Boaz recognizes who she is, and he's enamored with her character. He's impressed by the kind of young woman that she is and what she's done for her mother-in-law. And so he agrees to be the kinsman redeemer, and he sacrifices his family line to marry a woman whose child is going to belong to another, is going to have a different name. And so Boaz chooses as well a path of sacrifice and selflessness. And what we see finally in the story is that the strength and character of Boaz bring restoration and healing. Turn to chapter 4, and we'll just read the end of the story, verse 13, starting in verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth. She became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi," and they called him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And then we get a genealogy listing. And the top of the genealogy listing is a guy by the name of Perez. And a little bit of Bible trivia. If you go back to the book of Genesis and you start in chapter 37, you're going to read about Joseph. Joseph, who had a bunch of brothers who hated him, right? Because he was a know-it-all and he thought he was better than them. And he had these dreams that said he was going to rule over them. And so they wanted to kill him. But one of his brothers named Judah said, "Let's don't kill him. Let's sell him into slavery." And so he talked the rest of the boys into selling him into slavery, sparing his life. And Joseph, as we know, went down to Egypt and became the ruler over Egypt and saved the nation of Israel, saved his own brothers. But there's a weird story in the midst of this. We find out in chapter 37, we find out about Joseph. And then in chapter 38, we get this weird story about Judah. And it's like, what's happening there? And it is the story of Judah and Tamar. And it's like, what does this mean? Why is this here? He goes into Judah, one of Joseph's brothers, who marries a Canaanite woman and has 3 boys. And the first one is too evil, and God takes his life. And the second one is supposed to give Tamar a baby and won't do it. And so God takes his life. And then he's got a next boy, the youngest one, and he won't let her marry him because he's scared that his life is going to be taken. And so there's this weird thing with Judah where he will not provide her with a child. It's the law. He should. It's the right thing to do, but he won't do it. And so she tricks him into giving her a child. She acts like a prostitute. He goes in and sleeps with her. She keeps his signet ring, his stamp, the things that identify who he is. He leaves. She goes back home. She starts showing. She's pregnant. Somebody tells on her and tells Judah that she's been immoral. And so he's going to bring her out and let's stone her. And then she says, "Well, the guy that owns these is the one that got me pregnant." They, of course, are Judah's. Well, she is pregnant with twins. And there's a weird story, but the one that ends up being born first is named Perez. And that's the name we see in this genealogy at the end of Ruth, Perez. And we go down the line of Perez to Hezron, to Ram, to Amminadab, to Nahshon, to Salmon. And Salmon marries a woman by the name of Rahab, who was a prostitute in Jericho, that when Joshua led the armies of God, there were some spies that went to spy it out, and Rahab protected them, and she became a Jew. And this guy, Salmon, married her and had Boaz. Boaz's mom was Rahab, the prostitute, a Canaanite woman. And then Boaz marries Ruth, and they have Obed, who is the father of Jesse, who is the father of King David. And ultimately, we know that King David's line is the one who provides the Messiah, Jesus. So I got a question for you. Naomi loses her family, complete loss, which I do not believe God caused, but did he use that loss? Because that loss brought her back to Israel with Ruth, who then married Boaz, who then became the lineage of King David and of the Messiah. This missionary brought my mom into her home, and he allowed her to be around his family and see what a little bit of a functional life would look like with God in the middle of it. And she was impressed, and she was shaped and formed by that, as in juxtaposition to the dysfunctional home she grew up in. And when she turned 18, he said, if you stay here in Utah, some Mormon boy is going to find you and marry you and ruin all my work. And so I'm going to get you out of here. Sorry if you're Mormon, I'm not picking on you, but come on. So he says, you're off, and he sends her to Omaha, Nebraska, where she goes to Grace Bible Institute, where there's a young man in the Air Force, off his Air Force base at the end of his Vietnam tenure, working at the base in Bellevue. He's from Connecticut, of all places, but he's there with the military. They meet at a small church. They decide to get married. They're married while he's still in the Air Force and she's in Bible school. 9 months and 1 day after their wedding, they have a baby. I did the math. I've done it several times. It's real. They had a little baby. They named it Jonathan, but called him John. And he got to grow up. Sorry, don't like getting it. He grew up in a home where he got to know Jesus and follow him. You know, did God cause my mom's mom to die? I don't think so. But if that wouldn't have happened, she wouldn't have come to know Jesus. I don't know where you're at today. I don't know what your story is. I don't know what you're seeing, what you're experiencing. Moms, I don't know if you can see the track of tragedy and loss, because it's probably there. But what the scriptures remind us over and over again, and what we see in real life, is that God is a God of rescue and redemption. You do not know the future. God's not done yet. Keep praying, keep trusting him, keep being reminded of who he is. God, thanks for loving us and for redeeming us, for the salvation that you offer us so freely, simply by faith in Jesus, your son, who came to pay for our sins. Thank you for this Mother's Day. Thank you for our mothers. I pray you bless them beyond measure for their sacrifices, for the things they do each and every day for all of us. Fill them, fill their hearts with joy and peace. Comfort them in their sorrow and loss. Help them to continue to feel your presence and your power, and remind them that you're not done yet. And we pray all this in Jesus' name, amen. God bless you guys. Have a great Mother's Day. We'll see you next week.
The miracle you're waiting on feels a million miles away. You've always been so strong. Now you're tired of losing faith.